Okay, so we now start our recording. I'm going to turn it over to Lizette Camacho with our Financial Services Department.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Tempe Budget Planning Forum. My name is Lizette Camacho, Financial Services Director for the city. Joining me today is Tom Densing, Deputy City Manager, and Wydell Holmes, Strategic Management and Innovation Director. Thank you so much for attending today's forum. The city is currently in the process of developing the operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2024-25 that begins on July 1st, 2024. Today is an opportunity for you to provide feedback to the City Council and staff about the city's budget and budget priorities for the next fiscal year. We ask that you utilize the chat feature to ask questions during or at the end of the presentation. This meeting is being recorded and a copy will be placed on the Municipal Budget Office website. We have a brief presentation about the city's budget along with a couple of informative videos. At the end of the presentation, we will have time to answer questions related to the city's budget or the city's finances. In this presentation, we'll provide an overview of the municipal budgeting process. We'll also review the operating and capital budgets of the city. We'll identify short-term and long-term resources. We'll talk about gathering community input. And lastly, we'll discuss relationship between community input and City Council budget priorities. Now we'll show you a short video about the city's budget.
The city of Tempe is a vibrant, energetic, and forward-thinking place, attracting millions of people who live, work, play, and learn here. What we do in Tempe is different than in any other city. The programs and services we offer really do make waves in the desert. But none of it is possible without a balanced budget that reflects Tempe's diverse community. A city budget provides a blueprint for how your tax dollars are going to be spent. It shows how much revenue the city is expecting to take in and how much money is expected to go out. There are actually two annual budgets, one for operating and one for capital projects. The operating budget is for routine and daily services such as police and fire, keeping the library open, park maintenance, recreation programs, and solid waste collection, to name a few. The capital budget is a plan for large infrastructure projects. It projects the budget over the next 5 years. Some examples of capital projects are Tempe Streetcar, park improvements like playground equipment, new buildings, and bike lane or road improvements. So where does the money come from for all these projects and services? There are a few different sources. One is property taxes collected from Tempe property owners. Another is sales tax, which is collected anytime you make a purchase in Tempe. City revenue also comes from construction projects, federal and state partnerships, as well as service fees. Some city services, including solid waste collections and water utilities, charge user fees to collect revenue. These are called enterprise funds, and that means the city must collect enough revenue from users to cover the costs of providing those services. So how does the Tempe City Council decide what projects and services to fund? The city has identified 5 strategic priorities: safe and secure communities, strong community connections, quality of life, sustainable growth, and financial stability and vitality. These priorities have several goals attached to them. Every project, every service need is weighed against those goals to help the council make its budget decisions. The city tracks its progress towards these goals with a comprehensive data dashboard that shows all of the work that's being done. And of course, Tempe residents are the most important part of the process. The city collects resident input from online surveys, pop-up events, city council meetings, and public forums. This input helps the council understand how the community wants its money spent. As you can see, there's a lot that goes into the city budget process. But the outcome is worth the effort. A balanced budget that works for everyone in the Tempe community.
We prepare an annual budget because, like your personal or home budget, the city has limited resources. So prioritization of needs is crucial to the process to ensure we have sufficient funds or resources to address the needs. For strategic planning, the city has established measurable standards of service through performance measures, and we allocate resources to meet those standards to service. We'll talk more about performance measures in a bit. Like other cities and towns, Tempe is required by state law to adopt an annual budget, and the budget must be balanced. So here in Tempe, we developed the budget in a public process. As you can see on this slide, we've listed the public meeting dates. The meetings are held in the City Council chambers here in downtown Tempe. To the left is the capital budget, and to the right side is the operating budget. Our next public meeting will be held on February 22nd. In this meeting, we'll discuss the proposed capital projects and the updated long-range forecast. You can also find the meeting details on our Municipal Budget Office website. As you saw in the video, the city's operating budget controls the day-to-day operations of city departments. Some examples of operating budgets are personnel costs and supplies for recreational programs, chemicals for safe drinking water, and landscaping services for our parks and right-of-way. Our operating budget is a one-year plan, and as I said earlier, must be adapted annually. The city has 4 factors we consider in our operating budget. The first thing we consider is the priorities of the residents of Tempe and our city council. Our annual budget process is aligned to council-adopted priorities and tied to performance measures. We allocate resources to the most important needs and priorities of the community. We'll cover the council priorities and performance measures later in the presentation. Next, we evaluate the needs to ensure funding to maintain existing service levels and increase funding for areas that are priorities. We also monitor economic trends and indicators to ensure cities' revenues are sustainable and make sound financial decisions in order to maintain or expand services. Lastly, we monitor legislation to evaluate potential impact on city resources from the reduction in city revenues or any unfunded mandates. What you see here is the city's operating budget, the revenues for fiscal year 2023-24, which began on July 1st, 2023, and will end on June 30th, 2024. This is our current budget, and as you can see, most of our revenues come from taxes. The majority comes from sales tax, but we also include property tax in this category. So that's the blue section right there that you're seeing, and it's 41%. We also have revenues from user fees. That's the second largest. It's the light blue at 19%. User fees are revenues from operations where the users pay for the services that they receive. Some examples are the water and wastewater funds, solid waste pickup, and also medical emergency transport. The third largest is state shared revenues. We receive revenues from the state from sales tax, income tax, and vehicle license tax. This next slide is the operating budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. The total operating budget is $727 million. The largest component in the dark blue at 38% is personnel cost. The city personnel costs will cover wages and salaries for police officers, firefighters, park rangers. And then the next largest category at 23% is supplies and services. Some examples are electricity and fuel. And the third largest at 13% is debt service. Debt service is the fund that we use to repay the bonds we issue to fund capital projects. The next item that we'll talk about is the city's capital budget. Our capital budget is for large infrastructure projects to maintain the city's existing infrastructure, like fire stations, streets, parks, and water treatment plants. The projects are to build, the projects can also be used to build new infrastructure, like the Clark Park pool that was recently completed. To develop the capital budget, departments have asset management plans. They review the condition and life cycle of the assets or infrastructure they own. They also do preventative maintenance or improvements to extend the life of the asset. What you see on the right side is the funding mechanism for the capital projects. We primarily use GO debt, but we use cash first. The general obligation bonds is authorized by Tempe voters. And we have to make sure we stay within our statutory debt limits and make sure we have sufficient revenue to repay the debt. In this next slide, you see the sources of funds or the revenues for the capital projects. Our total capital funding for fiscal year 23-24 is $621.5 million. And as you can see on this slide, the largest component is the general obligation bonds. Again, they are authorized by Tempe voters. And the next largest at 18%, you'll see is the green, and that's outside revenue. So we do receive grants from the state and from the federal government to fund some of our projects. And this next slide, what you see is the CIP budget expenditures. The largest component at 48% is for general purpose. Again, that's parks, police stations, fire stations. And the second largest is your enterprise funds at 32%. And that's again, water, wastewater, and medical transport. This is a summary of our current year's budget for fiscal year 23-24. And as you can see, the capital projects is the $621.5 million. And then all the numbers below is the operating budgets for the various funds that we have. So like other government entities, the city of Tempe operates in a fund structure, and we'll cover that in a later slide. So we do have information on our website, and everything we just talked about is available in a user-friendly document that explains the city's current operating and capital budget. This information is on our website, and you can refer back to it, and the links are within this presentation as well. So as I said earlier, the city of Tempe operates under a fund structure. And so what I'll do is go clockwise here and start with the special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are legally restricted and can only be used for a specific purpose. Two examples are the Arts and Culture Fund and the Transit Funds. Both funds have a dedicated sales tax, and the revenues from the sales tax can only be used for transit operations, and then for the arts and culture, for any arts and culture types of expenditures. The governmental fund, or the general fund, is the largest operating fund for the city. It's also our most flexible fund. In this fund, you'll find the police operations, parks and recreation or community services, community development, historic preservation, and so on. The capital projects or debt service funds, within the capital projects funds, all the expenditures for capital projects occurs in that fund. The debt service is where we repay the debt that we issued to fund the capital projects. And lastly, the enterprise funds are your water and wastewater. So they operate much like a business. So the revenues they collect needs to support all the expenditures to provide the services that they provide. So with that, I will turn over the presentation to Mr. Dunsing, and he'll go over the next several slides.
Great, thank you, Lisette. So when we go through the budgeting process, it's really important for us to take really a long-term approach. As Lisette talked about a little bit earlier, a couple of things that we look at is any economic impacts to our long-term financial plan and any potential legislative changes. And I'm going to go through a fairly significant one here in the next couple slides. And so what we do is we really do a 5-year forecast of our major operating funds, revenues, and expenditures, and simply to analyze, are there any changes in the trends to the revenues we see coming in? We know what our baseline services are and the expenditures associated with those, so we try to forecast those. And then one other thing that we typically do is we look to see, is there any capacity to add services? And what you see here is the actual excerpt from a November 2023 long-range forecast presentation. And again, what we use this for is we look at the long term, where are we at, and then we will do another one on February 22nd. We will fine tune this forecast, and that really serves as our guide to this upcoming fiscal year 24-25 budget process. In other words, what revenues are we going to have available, and then how much or how the level of expenditures we can afford to budget for this upcoming fiscal year. So next slide, please, Lisette. So let me focus a little bit on the general fund here. Lisette looked at revenues citywide. And as you know, our general fund is the primary fund where we operate our police services, our fire services, our social services, parks and recreation services. It's the main fund where the cities typically provide services. And it's typically the fund most discussed when we have our budget meetings, our public budget meetings, and our budget meetings with our mayor and council. One of the things we wanted to show on this slide is our state shared revenues. You can see in our general fund, it's approximately 28% of our total general fund revenues. And state shared revenues are really legislative in nature. In other words, the state legislature determines the formula for all cities and towns to pass through certain revenues. And those certain revenues are kind of on the right. We get a share of state shared sales tax, of the state sales tax. We get a share of statewide vehicle license tax, and then also state income tax. And those are predetermined formulas. And one of the things that we have to continually watch, because these are legislatively provided to the city, are there any upcoming legislative changes? And as I'll talk about in the next slide, we did have a fairly significant change. Go ahead and advance the slide, Lisette. So in the legislative session that convened approximately a year ago, that the legislative sessions typically adjourn on or around, May or June. Well, last year, the session went particularly long, and one of the bills that was introduced and signed into law was Senate Bill 1131. The governor signed it on August 1st, 2023. And as the slide says, what that bill did is it prohibits any city from taxing residential rental. In other words, apartments in cities or any rental properties in the cities were subject to a sales tax. We're prohibited from doing that anymore under state law. And this impacted approximately, it did impact 75 of the 91 cities. You've probably read about it in the newspaper, and I'll get into the impact it had, but I can tell you, Tempe being a college town, and developing fairly heavy on the residential rental market, we did have the largest dollar impact of any city or town in Arizona. Next slide, Lisette. So we've presented this to mayor and council before. The impact of this change in August 2023 is actually January 1st, 2025. And very simply, what it means is we will have a loss in revenue in this upcoming fiscal year. We realize about half that loss. Again, it's effective halfway through the fiscal year, but really the full impact of this legislation is about $21 million to the city of Tempe, and that's an annual loss of revenue. It represents about 9% of sales tax revenue in the city, so it's fairly significant. And as you can see, I talked a little bit about the general fund. It's about a $13.8 million. That's an estimated impact. But it also impacts a couple of our legally restricted special revenue funds, and that's the transit fund. That's the fund we provide a lot of our bus, light rail, and shuttle services out of. It does impact that fund to the tune of about $5.8 million a year, and it affects our arts and culture fund. So we have basically introduced this concept to council. You'll hear it talked about quite often in this budget process. And this is an issue that we feel that we can manage our way through. It's a significant loss of revenue, but we feel we can at least maintain the current level of city services until we get to a point in time when we see natural economic growth, and then we can go back to entertaining adjustments or increases in citywide services. Next slide, please, Lisette. So now let's just talk a little bit about our community engagement and our policy decisions. And in just a minute, I'll turn it over to Wydell. But what you see here is it's really important that we receive public input, many different ways that you can provide input. We do an annual community survey to see how we're doing and see where we're not doing well. We absolutely look at the results of that survey and determine, do we need to focus on important items or important areas brought up by our community. We do a biennial business survey. Same thing. What's our business feedback on how we are doing in providing city services? Virtual and in public budget forums. That's what we're doing right now, and we will have another live budget forum tonight at, I believe it's 6 p.m. at the Tempe History Museum. Everyone's welcome. We do have an online budget survey, and you can see the web address on the screen. I encourage you to go in and provide your feedback. You can always reach out directly to mayor and council at the council communicator. And of course, you're always welcome to attend council meetings to provide any input that you feel is important. So now we will look at another short video.
And this video highlights the initiatives and projects the city funded in the fiscal year 2024 budget.
Hi, I'm Mayor Corey Woods. The city of Tempe is an energetic and innovative place, attracting millions of people who live, work, play, and learn here. This is reflected in the programs we offer and the services we provide. They really make a difference to the people in our community and in the quality of life we can offer. But none of it is possible without a budget that reflects funding for those programs and services that are priorities for the community. Every year, one of the most important things my city council colleagues and I do is pass the city's annual operating and capital budgets. But we need your help to do it. This is your budget. Your input and feedback as a resident or as a stakeholder truly matters. And when you ask, the city council and I listen. Here are just a few examples of how public input has helped to shape our city's future. You told us homelessness and human services was a top issue. We responded to your compassion. Tempe invested more than $5 million to clean up homeless encampments and provide transitional housing options for those in need. As a result, Tempe's most recent point-in-time count showed a reduction in the city's homeless population. Giving someone a safe, stable place to stay is the first step on the path to permanent housing and ending someone's homelessness. You asked for more park safety. We created a park ranger program and are improving city parks. The park rangers will provide security within Tempe's 52 parks and will be proactive in identifying and resolving problem activities. And they are the park's ambassadors. They will use outreach and education to engage park users. And we are doing more to make a better park system with more than $60 million for park maintenance and improvement projects. You want improved roads and sidewalks. We invested more than $81 million for city streets and sidewalks. The next several years, you will see improvements throughout the city. And we want to accelerate those improvements with a shorter target standard for streets by using a 4-year cycle rather than the current 13-year cycle. But we'll need your approval when we present a bond program to Tempe voters. These are just a few examples of how the city budget truly works for you. And now it's our turn to do the asking. We invite you to take part in the budget planning process for the next fiscal year, which begins on July 1st. We want your feedback, and there are plenty of opportunities to get involved. We will host several public meetings this spring where you can provide input. You can also visit tempe.gov/forum and tell us your top priorities for investing in the community. To get information about all of this and the city's budget process, please visit tempe.gov/budgetplan or call Tempe 311. It's your voice that will help build the future of our great city.
All right, thanks, Lisette. So again, this slide illustrates the importance of providing input for the decision-making process. Again, we reach out through business and community surveys. The input from these forums are provided to council. And the budget survey, if you go online and take that, we absolutely provide that to council. The input from the community and budget surveys, that second bullet point, really what that does is that really directly informs us about 30% of the performance measures that really operationalize our city council priorities. And we've got Wydell Holmes, director of our Office of Strategic Management and Budget, to kind of go into that a little bit. And then please realize that data from our community is absolutely used to develop and improve our operational strategies. And with that, I will turn it over to Wydell.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Wydell Holmes. I'm the director of our Strategic Management and Innovation Office, and our office is charged with collaborating across city departments in regards to our mayor and council's 5 strategic priorities. These are priority areas that could be thematic for any community, but what makes it unique is how Tempe operationalizes these areas for our community, for our businesses, for our residents, and for our visitors. So each of these priorities have several performance measures associated with them. We have total over 100 performance measures. And as Tom said, at least 30% of those are informed by the results from our community, business, and employee surveys. And so we do take the data that our residents provide us, that our business provide us, to inform, like, where do we want to go? What are our targets? How do we get there? And so we work collaboratively with departments and also other community partners and agencies across Tempe to help us achieve those targets. So as you can see, we have safe and secure communities, from strong community connections, quality of life, priorities around sustainable growth and development, as well as operationalized measures around financial stability and vitality. Next slide, please. Those performance measures are available at performance.tempe.gov, and we encourage you to engage with the dashboards, learn about all of the performance measures. I have 3 that I'd like to highlight, as Tom spoke before and as the mayor did in his video, around our pavement quality index. the mayor said, we're currently on a 13-year cycle to make sure that all of our streets are rating at a 70 or higher. And yes, we do assess the quality of our pavement here in Tempe, and we're really trying to get that to a 4-year cycle and actually achieve even higher than 70 as a standard score. And that's an industry score. So in a lot of our performance measures, we benchmark against best performance, high performing industry standards, and not just did we do better than last year. We also have performance measures around homelessness that the mayor spoke to as well. And then we also are looking at providing more tree and shade canopy in the city. And what this particular performance measure means is it's not just about planting more trees, it's also about how do we utilize innovative engineered design shade to create more shade in our cities for both comfort and health. Next slide, please. And so similar to the Tempe Forum, where you can allocate your $100 theoretical budget dollars for priorities for Tempe, early in the budget process, we actually asked mayor and council to do the same. And this isn't an allocation of resources and it's not an appropriation, but it helps give staff some early guidance on where should we focus some of our strategies, what performance measures should we extract a little bit for even a higher level of focus, and where should we partner and collaborate more to achieve the targets that we've set out. And so on the next slide, I'd like to show you some of the other data that the council utilizes. So in addition to utilizing the data from Tempe Forum, which is where you have shared where you would like budgets prioritized, and then also sharing with our mayor and council their collective results in regards to allocating or at least distributing theoretical dollars for focus in this budget cycle. We also look at our community survey results. And you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, we have some areas that we call the opportunities for improvement. These are areas that are very important to our community, but are receiving less satisfaction in our community survey. And so we look at things like our services for older adults, our health and human and social services, neighborhoods, economic business development, and then also traffic safety. And so you'll see that this is where we will be identifying this acceleration models from the performance measures that we want to put a hyper focus on in the budgeting process, and also most importantly in the strategic development process. Next slide, please. And similar to that quadrant of opportunity in the community survey, we also identify areas to emphasize from our business survey. Some of those included, like I mentioned before, our economic and business development, not too differently from our community survey, a feeling of safety in the city, not just for our residents, but also for our workers and our employees and people visiting our businesses here in Tempe. Street maintenance, you'll see again as an area of opportunity and focus, as well as traffic and housing here in our community. So this starts to create some guidelines for us as staff on how we want to approach our operations, our innovation, our creativity, as well as leveraging our partnerships. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned before, the START tool, this is our strategy tool for aligning resources for Tempe. And we know the acronym is START. So we do start our budget process with getting this feedback from the city council and mayor, as well as from you, our community. And this is just an illustration of the tool that we utilize for our mayor and council, very similar to what you'll find at tempe.gov/forum for your budget, your input. And they allocate dollars, or they distribute dollars across this theoretical framework. And that gives us the acceleration models that we'll be focusing on in this budget year. Next slide, please. One of the elements that the council and mayor look at is, are the performance measures meeting targets? Are they close to our benchmark desired goals? Have they had a history of being important to our community? Have they become a point of emphasis in our recent community and business and employee surveys? And so from our START tool exercise last fall, we identified 5 performance measures that we are prioritizing for acceleration. That includes our payment quality, ending our homelessness, property code enforcement, which can be both residential and commercial property, making sure that our residents feel safe in their neighborhood, and as well as our employee turnover. Tempe has not been immune to what is going on nationwide in regards to the workforce. So we know that that is one of our main foundations for providing services to Tempe. Our performance measures and the acceleration models that were identified in the START tool, these are the 5 performance measures that had points from at least 4 council members. So that shows inertia behind gaining consensus as we move through the budget process. These performance measures also receive the highest total of points distribution, as well as the highest averages and the highest median scores. So we utilize this just strictly as a tool to get us started in the budget process as well as in the strategy process. Next slide, please. And as Tom mentioned before, we are facing a $20 million reduction in our budget based on our legislative decisions. And so while in years past, we may have identified additional funds needed as a strategy, really we're emphasizing this year on collaboration and shifting resources. So where do we have the bigger yeses? Where can we move things around to still reach our targets for those 5 particular acceleration models, and at the same time, keeping our business and our residential services in a high performing status. So we work with our departments on collective strategies. We work with strategy partners across all departments. Not one performance measure has a strategy that's solely owned by one department. We know that there is a collective effort, a force multiplier, if you will, as we bring in other departments and other partners in regards to achieving and operationalizing these strategies. Next slide, please. And so I'll turn it back over to Lisette and Tom, and thank you for being here today.
Swidell. Tom, you're muted.
Sorry about that. What you'll see on this slide is online access to a lot of information. You can go into the budget plan information, and really what this does is allow you to provide feedback. The financial history and transparency, if you want to view prior budgets, if you want to view audited financial reports, anything financial is on our Open Books webpage. Again, the online survey, tempe.gov/forum, and anything performance measure related. There's a plethora of information at our performance.tempe.gov. And with that, we will, we'd like to first off, thank you for attending, and we're certainly open for any questions whatsoever.
So to ask questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or you can come off mute.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, David. Go ahead.
There are like 13 different topics in this presentation, but I'll try and get to the point as quickly as possible. I know in the past the city has said that it's not about how much money we're spending, but it's about achieving the desired outcome. But I know that when the city wanted to accelerate the PQI, I think we put $8 million into the fund. And now the city wants to spend up to $200 million on pavement in total, including parking lots and maintenance and everything else. But at the same time, we have performance measures like our housing inventory ratio, where we need to build up to 100 units every 30 days, but the city hasn't significantly increased funding in that area. I know that you have increased funding for homeless services, and I really do actually appreciate that. That's the great first step to take. But now we're at a point where people need affordable housing. You want to retain employees, that needs affordable housing too. So I'm really trying to figure out, why would the city spend $200 million on pavement knowing that we have this extreme need for housing?
I'll start off, David. Thank you for your question. And again, thank you for being here. I think part of this is that making sure that we're meeting needs of all of our residents. And we know that, any community is an ecosystem of people, of our infrastructure, as well as, in Tempe, especially our heart towards everyone here that lives here and visits in Tempe. And so we do have our Hometown for All fund that is a very innovative, unique strategy in regards to raising additional funds, both city funds as well as funds from other donors in regards to affordable housing. I do know that we are looking at more that we can do in regards to other partnerships across the city, trying to look at innovative ways where we can have property ready so that when we work with other affordable housing developments, that we already have kind of almost not turnkey property, but at least turnkey land. And that helps with making those units affordable. And I know that our housing department is working diligently on this. We are not happy where we are as well, but we are excited about some of the innovative strategies that have been put forth by the mayor and council, as well as, you know, the collaborations that we have going on. So it's not about one thing over another. It's about trying to do both. So I look at this as an and situation. Our city, the funds that we bring into our city that can be utilized for affordable housing are generated by also our visits to our city and our retail and businesses, as Tom mentioned earlier, in our revenue sources. So it is about balancing both of those. And it's not necessarily about not wanting to do something. It's just how do we do this with some of the other constraints and priorities that exist across all communities. And I'll hand it back to Tom.
Yeah, and David, I know that you follow kind of what's happening at the council level. And as you probably know, back on December 5th, council directed staff to evaluate a bond program to facilitate our affordable housing. And so we are set to present that at this Thursday's work study session. So, and I know you tune into all those meetings, and the information's online regarding not only currently what we're doing, but probably more importantly, do we have the capacity to expand our bond program in order to directly address affordable housing?
Well, I know that as my understanding is that the PQI is currently on track. So even if so you want to accelerate the PQI, but if we were just to continue as we're doing, it would continue on schedule. But at the same time, our affordable housing ratio is completely off track. And we're talking about doing, $200 million for pavement, but $30 million for affordable housing. And honestly, I expect, based on what the city of Tempe has been doing, that's like, maybe 600 units of affordable housing, like 6 months worth of progress or something like that. And so we're talking about shifting resources, even $8 million that you originally put into the PQI, even though that's not revolutionary, that could still be a contribution to Hometown for All. And to me, it doesn't make sense why we would accelerate the PQI knowing that we are on schedule to achieve that performance measure, but we're not achieving this other performance measure. And I know, yeah, sorry, I'll move on to the next topic. Because transit satisfaction is another area where the city is failing to achieve it. And we're talking about engineered shade, but we don't have bus stop shelters. So one of my concerns is that the city is trying to implement shade structures on Mill Avenue, for example, but there are many locations in the city where we don't have any shade at all. So is the city doing anything? I know you're worried about cutting the transit fund, but the city honestly should be increasing our transit fund. So what are we doing to achieve that performance measure?
David, I'll start off with in regards to our bus stop shelter, we are installing over 30 shelters this fiscal year. And that started last July 1 and should be concluding June 30th of 2024 of this year. So we are investing in at least 30 bus shelters across the city with our transit funds. And we know that that's only a small portion of shade and tree canopy. But it is a start in regards to making sure that everyone has access to our transit stations or transit system and would be, more comfortable and healthy. So there are about, like I said, 30 going in this particular year. And I'll turn it back to Tom.
Open up for any more questions, and also, David, one of the challenges we're going to have is we are seeing a revenue reduction in the transit fund. Again, this was the state legislature, not the city. And so, we're going to have to manage through that issue.
Yeah, I know that's not really the topic of today's meeting, but I actually think that if we were to legalize the rental tax, that money should specifically go to support affordable housing. So if the city of Tempe wanted to put $21 million into Hometown for All, I would support a rental tax in that case, but that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. If anyone else has any, feel free to come off mute and put them there. Otherwise, I have put the link to the online comment form in the chat. And as we've mentioned, you're also welcome to join us tonight down at the History Museum at 6 p.m. Okay, any final comments, team?
Thank you for attending the forum.
I concur. Thank you and appreciate your engagement with the performance measures as well as how our resources can be allocated for the best Tempe.